In my opinion, Yamaha makes some of the best naked motorcycles in the world right now. The MT-07 is a brilliant affordable middleweight, the MT-09 a little more serious but still awesome value for money, and then of course you got their bonkers MT-10 with an engine derived from their R1 super duper bike.
But which is actually better on the road, and is more power always better, or is there just as much fun to be had on one of these more modest machines, especially considering you save a few grand? Well, I'm here at Yamaha's UK Press Experience Day to ride them all back to back and find out.
So we'll start with the entry point, and that's the MT-07, and at £7,510 it seems pretty reasonable. So what do you get for your money?
Well, for me, the standout feature of this bike is the twin-cylinder CP2 engine. It might sound quite modest at 72 horsepower and 689cc, but the MT in the name stands for Masters of Torque, and that's exactly what this thing feels like. You've got so much punch in the mid-range, it's got such a lively throttle delivery, and you're on a relatively short wheelbase and with a very upright riding position, and that's a cocktail that can mean only one thing, which is plenty of power wheelies. The other massive strength of this bike as well is that it's so lightweight. It's 184 kilograms curb, and I think that's why it's appealing to both newer riders and the more experienced. On the one hand, it's really easy to get on with and thread through traffic at lower speeds, but also it makes it feel responsive and dynamic on the open road when you start to wring its neck a little. Otherwise, it's a relatively modest spec. You know, you've got right way up forks, axially mounted brakes, and all the hardware is pretty much what you'd expect for this price point. But new for 2023, they have jazzed things up a little bit in the cockpit. So there's now a TFT display that offers some phone connectivity features, and also you've now got the option of their quick shifter accessory, which this bike is pre-wired for, but otherwise it's the same MT-07 that we know and love.
So look, I'm going to ride the same country road 3 times on these bikes for a fair comparison, and it is a bit bumpy, so I guess you could call it real world riding conditions. And with this bike, straight away I'm noticing just how compact and light it is. Definitely manageable for new riders. It's not intimidating at all, and yet still that engine's got enough punch and snap to make it plenty of fun up to 60 or 70, maybe a bit beyond. Also, gotta say, they've done a great job with the exhaust on this one. It really does sound good for a 2023 bike with all the emissions restrictions now. Much more bass and beef than I was expecting, and I've got to say I'm impressed with this new dash.
Now look, it's hard to capture the full visual pleasure of a TFT display on camera, but trust me, even in these bright conditions it really is punchy, plenty of contrast, and it's a big step up from the LCD display on last year's model. This is such a good, simple bike, a great engine, lightweight, 7.5 grand. What's not to like?
Now the next rung on the Yamaha naked ladder is this, the MT09, and having reviewed it a couple of years back, I can already tell you it's an absolute peach. For £9,810 you get an incredible road bike that's massively entertaining, but also pretty comfortable and upright, and that actually makes it quite versatile and practical. Now the star of the show again is the engine, and this time you get an extra cylinder, so it's an inline triple, and also an extra couple of hundred cc's of capacity. So the result at the back wheel is 117 horsepower at 10,000 RPM and 93 Newton meters of peak torque at 7,000. So we're starting to get pretty serious in terms of performance figures, and the chassis is a lot more sporty as well. So you've got an upside down fork at the front, you've got adjustability there as well, you've got radially mounted 4-pot brakes for much more stopping power and feel, and then you've got these more sport biased Bridgestone S22 tyres as opposed to the all-rounders, the Road 5s from Michelin on the MT-07. It's all a bit of a step up, and you could say the same for the electronics as well. So you've got traction control, slide control, wheelie control, brake control, and the rider aids use a 6-axis inertial measurement unit to make them lean sensitive. So it's pretty much trickled down from the R1 development program. Needless to say, I am quite looking forward to riding this one.
straight away you can feel that this is a big step up from the MT-07. Lots more power, lots more speed, and with the higher seat you've got a much more sporty riding position. With the MT-07 the suspension does feel a bit squishy and built to a price, but this one is a lot more composed, and I really enjoy this bike every time I ride it. I think it's the torque in the mid-range that makes it so addictive versus some of the other triples on the market, to be fair, and it doesn't die off like the MT-07. When you get up to 70 or 80 it just keeps pulling. The sound is epic too. I love that triple soundtrack, and it's quite a bit louder, possibly because you've got the stereo exhaust exits, so you're getting plenty of volume in each ear. Oh, I love those little pops on the quick shifter as well.
Don't be fooled though into thinking this is purely a sporty, uncompromising naked that's built for non-stop hooning. The handlebars are actually set surprisingly high, and so it's the sort of bike you really feel like you could ride all day on, or ride to the shop, or ride to work. Quite civilized really, well, if you want it to be. All round excellent from my point of view, apart from perhaps the looks, which do take a while to get used to, but for the more experienced rider against the MT-07, it's certainly a much more satisfying and much more engaging riding experience.
Now things are starting to get pretty serious. We've got the MT-10 and this costs £14,210. This is Yamaha's Super Naked, effectively an R1 with flat bars and no fairings. And while the engine is tuned down a little bit, it still makes 164 horsepower at 11,500 RPM and bags of torque at 112 Newton meters. Plus, it makes an incredible sound, just like an R1, owing to the cross-plane crank. You'll hear that in a moment when I do the sound check. And interestingly, because of modern day emissions regulations, the exhaust systems are super restrictive, and so Yamaha have tried to get around this with some little acoustic amplifier grills, they call them, in the top of the tank here, and they're meant to give you more induction sound when you're actually on the bike and giving it some gas. Much like the MT-09, you've got a full suite of rider aids and riding modes, and they're all managed through the 4.2-inch TFT display, and the chassis spec is super sporty too. So you've got radially mounted 4-pot brakes with a Brembo radial master cylinder, fully adjustable suspension as you'd expect, and the same Bridgestone S22 tyres as the MT-09. And this all weighs in at a relatively modest 212 kilograms curb. I mean, admittedly, that's a good 30 kilograms or so more than the MT-07 and still 20-ish more than the MT-09, but still not bad for a bike with this much power.
I think I was actually expecting this bike to be like firmer. It's definitely bigger physically, it feels quite roomy. But yeah, it's also quite cushy in the ride. It feels like it'd be a great road bike. Also, surprisingly, it's quite forgiving on the throttle, especially in this B mode. It feels very rideable. That is, until you get it up to over like 5 or 6k RPM. I know I've said it already, but the sound is absolutely immense. Right up there for me with the best sounding bikes on the planet. Maybe it's those grills on the top of the tank that are helping too. Wind it up, get it singing, super smooth, loads of grunt, wonderful.
So I thoroughly enjoyed that one as well, but there's one thing with road riding specifically, and that's that you can't quite give the MT-10 the full beans anywhere near as often as the other two. And so in some way, and with most other litre naked bikes like this from my experience, you can feel a tiny bit less satisfied when you hop off.
For me, I think it's got to be the MT-09. It's right in that sweet spot of just over 100 horses. And also at just under 10 grand, it seems like a reasonable amount of money for all that performance and features that you're getting. Genuinely, this is one of my favorite road bikes on the market, but as always, I'd love to know which one you'd pick, so do let me know down in the comments. And also, if you want to see more of the best new Yamahas for 2023, then I made a list at Motorcycle Live. I'll stick it on the screen here, give it a click, give it a watch, let me know which one you'd pick. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.